The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, best digital health, best incubator accelerator, best startup.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation.
Welcome to the Galien Foundation Week of Innovation webinars in New York. My name is Alexandra Moons, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing at H1 and the moderator for today's session. The objective of this week is to provide additional content and background for our largest annual event, the Prix Galien USA Awards, to be held this Thursday in New York. We've developed this webinar series to give our nominees for Best Pharmaceutical, Best Biotech, Best MedTech, Best Digital Solution, and Best Startup Accelerator Incubator categories each greater visibility in describing their journey of medical discovery. This year's Galien USA Awards has a record of 147 nominees across 6 categories from 126 companies, covering 15 diverse therapeutic areas ranging from cancer, cardiology, neuroscience to infectious diseases, and very rare genetic disorders and vaccines. We will be looking closely at the products in all these critical areas throughout the week. Now, in the Best Biotechnology Product category, which is our focus of today, we will be holding 3 webinars due to a large number of products representing this important field. This webinar is devoted to nominees in rare diseases. And what we will cover today relates to the central question: will clinical progress in therapies that promise a genetic-based cure for devastating rare diseases lead to similar progress in public awareness and regulatory support that will ensure access to all patients who can benefit? This webinar includes some time for audience questions as well. So if you have any, please feel free to forward those to myself, the moderator, using the link on your screen. Now, let me start by introducing our rare genetic disorder nominee representatives who are joining me for this webcast. We have Arjen Lemon, who is the VP of Corporate Development and Strategy at argenx, representing the Vyvgart product. We've got Dr. Christine Clemson, Senior VP and Global Head of Medical Affairs at Albreo Pharma, who is representing the Bilvejay's product. Apologize. We've got Shepard Mpofu, who is the SVP and Chief Medical Officer at Novartis Gene Therapies, who is representing the Zolgensma product. And we've got Philip van den Wijngaard, Global Head of TTP at Sanofi, who's representing the Cablivi product. And last, we also have Tom Schall, who is a President and CEO of Chemocentrics, who is representing the Tabnios products. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about each of the different nominated products, you can find a company-provided statement linked in the chat, which is available for viewing during this webcast. Now, to kick this conversation off, I would like to ask each of our representatives to briefly address the following question. Why did your company choose to focus on the disease state and indication associated with the product? And how significant was the level of unmet medical need here? And let's start off with Arjen. Would you mind just sharing a little bit of your view on this?
Absolutely. First of all, let me say it's an honor that Vyvgart, our therapy that's being developed for autoimmune patients, is being considered for Prix Galien amongst a portfolio of such strong innovations for patients across rare diseases. Turning to your question, so argenx is a company committed to improving the lives of people suffering from severe autoimmune diseases. And within that, as a biotech company, we focus on orphan or rare diseases. To understand the strategy and steps we went through to select myasthenia gravis, the first indication in which Vyvgart has been approved, I need to very briefly explain what the drug does. Vyvgart blocks FcRn, which is a target involved in the recycling of antibodies. And by blocking FcRn, you reduce antibody levels. This is a precision tool for autoimmune diseases driven by antibodies and doesn't require a broad suppression of the immune system. And if you look in literature, there's dozens of diseases where antibodies are identified as a part of the disease. But in our selection, where we spend our time is to truly focus and understand the case studies and translational data where we believe that autoantibodies are the true driver of the autoimmune disease. In addition to that, which is the case in myasthenia gravis, where that link was very established. In addition to that, we spend a lot of time getting to know the community from a bottoms up in our organization. And what we've heard from neurologists treating myasthenia gravis is that they rank MG second only to ALS as one of the most severe diseases that they treat. We've also heard from patients in detail to understand their unmet need and the clinical burden they face. They face issues across their lifestyle, across their quality of life, stopping them from working, giving up social activities. So we prioritize myasthenia gravis, I think, based on the scientific translational link, but the unmet need was a big factor in selecting this indication. And lastly, like I said, our mode of action is not limited to just myasthenia gravis. We believe that Vyvgart can actually play a role in a broad set of autoimmune diseases going forward. And we're currently developing Vyvgart, efgartigimod, in 10 different indications at this time, hoping to achieve similar results as we've been able to do for the myasthenia gravis community.
That's amazing. Just maybe as a quick follow-up, those 10 additional indications that you mentioned, are those also within the rare disease area, or are a couple of those maybe also in a bit more generalized therapeutic area?
It's a great question. I think the majority of those are all rare diseases, and they're rare diseases like pemphigus vulgaris, a skin blistering disease. They include indications like membranous nephropathy, an autoimmune disease of the kidney. They include indications like immune thrombocytopenia and hematological disorder. Amongst the 10, there is also 2 somewhat larger indications, being Sjögren's syndrome and also long COVID POTS, so one of the consequences of the COVID pandemic. Amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Christine, would you also mind just sharing your view on this, really from that unmet medical need and how you guys have really tried to change and make an effort there?
Sure. Thank you so much, Alexandra. I'd like to start by echoing Arjun's thanks to the Galien Foundation. As a small biotech, we at Albireo are just thrilled to be considered for this great honor, and we certainly are sitting among some incredible innovations. So Albireo is a company that's focused on bile salt metabolism. And our drug, Bylvay, or odevixibat, is a drug in a new class of drugs called IBAT inhibitors, or ileal bile acid transport inhibitors. And the disease that we're approved for is progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis. However, there are many rare pediatric liver diseases that ultimately culminate from the same mechanism of action, which is bile salts are retained in the liver and become very devastating and cause cirrhosis and ultimately liver failure. PFIC is one of those diseases, and it's a genetic disease, but it's really a spectrum of diseases. There are maybe 11 genes now known to cause PFIC. So there are multiple types of PFIC, 1 through 9, 10, 11 at this point, many of them becoming rarer and rarer and rarer. So we chose PFIC because the unmet need is just astounding. And there wasn't a lot of innovation, especially in the pediatric liver space. And so this disease, while it ultimately can culminate in liver failure, the symptom that's extremely distressing is the pruritus or the itching. And these kids really start itching really from birth, and they just cannot stop themselves from scratching and destroying their skin. They don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't develop. The families don't sleep, and their work is very it's very destructive to a work-home life balance. They oftentimes their financial implications of not being able to work because you're up all night with your children. And so the only solution before our drug was approved was surgical. So a diversion surgery, which is very life-changing for these kids because, they have a stoma, and it really, by the time they're young adults, they just really, the quality of life is quite low. And then the diversions may work initially, but oftentimes they stop working so the itching can return. So the only real solution before our drug came on the market was a liver transplant, which many patients and caregivers will describe. You're trading one disease for another. And in many of these subtypes of PFIC, a transplant isn't curative. You either, sometimes the disease will be recapitulated if there's an autoimmune reaction. If they haven't seen the native protein before, and then the liver gets attacked or the bile ducts get attacked, and these patients recapitulate the disease. Or in PFIC type 1, liver transplant will stop the itching, but then you recapitulate a whole new set of symptoms like diarrhea and fatty liver. So an IBAT inhibitor is what we consider a medical diversion surgery. So you're capitalizing on the enterohepatic circulation. So the bile salts that are retained in the liver, there's a natural system to recycle those from the liver to the intestine back to the liver. Our drug stops that recycling, and so the bile salts don't get transported back to the liver, they get excreted through the feces. And so in lowering the serum bile acid load or the overall bile acid load, you reduce the pruritus and you protect the liver. So that's the first indication that we are we're approved for. We just got top-line data in a very similar disease, ultra-rare disease called Alagille syndrome. And we're, well into our third phase 3 study in a similar indication called biliary atresia, which is the #1 reason for pediatric transplant in the world. So lots to come. But that, in summary, is why we chose the disease and what the drug does.
That's amazing. Maybe just short follow-up question. Is the drug something that is curative, or is it meant to be lifelong taking for those young patients?
Yes, it can be very transformative for these patients, and it works very quickly, oftentimes within a week, but it is a chronic therapy.
Yeah, okay. I can imagine how tricky that must be, especially at such young ages, to start imagining taking pills for the rest of your life. But of course, if it's worth it, then you do everything that you need to do. Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you.
Shepard, would you also be willing to share with us a little bit your sense of why exactly your company chose to go into this specific disease and where that unmet need was?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and also a great pleasure to be with the panel here today, expressing on behalf of Novartis Gene Therapy our profound gratitude for the nomination to the Galien. Very excited. At Novartis Gene Therapies, we are reimagining medicine, and we are really pioneering on research and development for rare, severe genetic diseases, leveraging on our platform. Maybe just to dial back, with research that began nearly a decade ago, Novartis Gene Therapy has really transformed the lives of babies and children with the rare disease spinal muscular atrophy, or what's commonly called SMA. SMA is a leading genetic disease that causes infant death. It is a progressive and really devastating genetic disease that results in progressive muscle weakness and paralysis. It's caused by the lack of the functional survivor motor neuron gene, which is also called SMN1. When left untreated, children usually end up needing permanent ventilation or die before the age of 2 in 90% of the cases. It occurs 1 in every 10,000 live births. At the time of research, when Zolgensma was being looked at, there were no approved SMA therapies. Patients were often told to take their children home and love them for the time they had left. And so Zolgensma really has changed the lives of patients. It's the one and only gene therapy for SMA. It is administered as a single infusion intravenously, and it delivers a new working copy of the SMN1 gene into patient cells, motor neurons, thus by halting disease progression and really continuing sustained production of the SMN1 protein, which is important for neuromuscular function. All other treatments for SMA require repeat dosing and do not really address the genetic root cause of the disease. Data unequivocally these days has shown that the earlier a child is diagnosed and treated for SMA, the better the outcomes they will experience. And I believe Zolgensma is becoming a physician's choice for treating SMA. We have demonstrated in a number of clinical trials significant and clinically meaningful therapeutic benefit in both pre-symptomatic and symptomatic SMA, including prolonged event-free survival and achievement of motor milestones unparalleled to what is seen in the natural history of the disease. And we have also seen in our long-term studies durable effect now for more than 5 years post-dosing. What's remarkable is the rapid improvement in motor milestones that is seen within the first month of treatment. We also have noted some critical facets in terms of improvements of what really matters to patients pertaining to bulbar function. So we have an improvement in swallowing, patients can feed orally, and they can also maintain their respiratory independence, thus avoiding things like aspiration pneumonia or respiratory infection. So overall, Zolgensma is now approved by the FDA since 2019, and we have treated more than 2,500 patients across 45 countries where we are approved. And we have seen these kids reaching milestones not seen in the natural history of SMA.
Amazing. That's fantastic, obviously. I don't have any immediate follow-up questions, but I'm sure others will come during the rest of this webinar. Philippe, what about you? Could you tell us a little bit more about, why your company chose to focus on this specific disease state and what the unmet need was that you guys are tackling?
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra, and thank you to the Galien team for inviting us. Great to be here, and also great to see all the innovation that is explained and moving around. Very exciting. Now, Cablivi, let me remind everyone that Cablivi is the first globally approved nanobody that entered the market and the patients like 3-4 years ago. When I'm talking nanobody, I'm talking a pretty interesting technology platform that I'm sure Arjan know everything about, because I see there a llama also in his picture. Unfortunately, I had the privilege to start the whole development already at the old Ablings days. So, and we share, so Argenix and Ablings shared at that time, and still the same type of technology platform, but our nanobodies are slightly different. But I'm not going to go into that level of detail for sure. But exciting to see that both nanobodies make it to the Galien for sure. Now, anyway, so with Ablings, our Cablivi journey started about 12 years ago. Where we have been looking at a nanobody that is able to improve patient life in acquired TTP, and acquired TTPs, ultra rare, life-threatening blood clotting disorder. It stands for acquired thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura. So it's a lot of word, but it's a very devastating disease, and everyone here of us can be hit by this disease and can go very quickly from a pretty healthy state to pretty highly morbid and even mortality in 20% of the cases. This is gonna be the most devastating consequence of the disease for sure. But with Cablivi, clearly we have been able to impact the current standard of care, which consists of two pillars today, with on the one hand side plasma exchange, plasmapheresis, and on the other side immunosuppressors. And this obviously already improved the TTP patients' life pretty significantly, but still patients were dying and on the long run experiencing quite impactful symptoms. So that's where Cablivi, our nanobody, kicked in, and with Cablivi we are able to stop microclots, and that's where the disease is built on. So for one or another reason, we don't know exactly why an enzyme, ADAMTase 13, is becoming is not doing the job properly, and makes sure that the ultra van Willebrand factor ultra large multimers are not being cleaved anymore, and this is causing microclots, and these microclots lead them to different morbidity. So long story short, with Cablivi we are able to break that change and have an opportunity to stop this microclot formation and all the consequent morbidity. Now, to come back on your question, so yeah, ATTP, definitely the unmet need is there, and with our nanobody we saw a chance and opportunity to improve the patient's life. Clearly, as we were a small biotech, there was a second reason also why we looked for this ultra rare blood clotting disorder, and is the fact that we were looking for a disease field where we could make a proof of concept, where we could show that this nanobody technology definitely works and then can be leveraged by other companies like Argenix for different other diseases as well. And so that's where we also end up with ATTP, because it made it's a disease field where the clinical trials that we want to run are still feasible for a biotech company to run. You can demonstrate quite quickly an impact in this patient community, which allow you to get a kind of accelerated development path towards launch and towards getting access for patients to this drug. So I think over the last 3-4 years, so we were able to launch Cablivi first in US in 2018, and then afterwards in first in Europe, 18, and then afterwards in US in 2019. Since then, we have been able to treat more than 3,000 500 patients, which is quite impressive. And knowing that with Cabli we remove mortality to close to zero, and having a current mortality rate without Cabli was still up to 20-25%. Yeah, you can make the maths yourself. We were able to, I think, save more than 1,000 patients' life, and that's what we are doing it for. So I'm pretty grateful for the pioneering work that Ablings has been doing, and then afterwards for Sanofi offering us the opportunity to make sure that the drug is getting to the patient that needs and deserves it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Tom, what about you? Do you could you tell us a little bit about the why you guys chose this specific disease state and that level of unmet need that you were really addressing?
Absolutely, Alexandra. Thank you so much. I'm delighted and honored to be here. I'm very grateful for the nomination and so fortunate to be included among such a prestigious group of sponsors and great talents and wonderful innovative medicine. So thank you to the foundation for allowing us this opportunity. We've always been passionate at ChemoCentrix about orphan disease because these orphan diseases are areas of high unmet need where frequently patient populations have been ignored historically. And when new therapies are brought to them, they've typically not been custom designed for their orphan disease. They are usually a bolt-on therapy from approved in some other area, which is now tried in their particular disorder. So I think it's very gratifying that the evolution of medicine in the orphan space is to be, let's think more carefully and specifically about these disease states and try to find novel, innovative therapies for them. That was the case in our situation. We developed a drug called Tavneos, which is an orally administered small molecule inhibitor of something called the complement fragment C5a receptor, or C5AR. And we developed it for a for a disorder called ANCA-associated vasculitis, or that stands for anti-neutrophil cytoplasmic autoantibody associated vasculitis, for those of you who are keen on that, on knowing what that acronym means. So ANCA vasculitis is a very dreadful condition where you have autoantibodies against components of your own neutrophils, the body's most abundant inflammatory cells. That, coupled with the constitutive activation of the complement cascade, leads to a highly pro-inflammatory fragment called C5a being overexpressed. So the combination of that drives neutrophils crazy, and they create a blood vessel inflammation, the vasculitis, which eventually leads to not just the necrosis of blood vessels, but also the failure of organs that those vessels supply, including, importantly, organs like the kidney. So that's the other area we've been passionate about is areas of kidney disease. Kidney disease is a scourge of modern society, both for patients, for the larger society, and certainly for healthcare systems. And if we don't do something about kidney disease and end-stage renal disease, we'll probably bankrupt most national systems of healthcare. So big area of unmet need across the board. ANCA vasculitis patients, they just simply have an unacceptable life, in my opinion, with standard care. Pre-Tavneos, standard care is typically high doses of glucocorticoids or steroids coupled with an immunosuppressant, a drug cyclophosphamide has been historically used for about 50 years, 40 years. More recently, they use a B-cell depleting antibody. So that's the combination. That's pre-Tavneos standard care. Unfortunately, this doesn't solve a lot of the problems. It does forestall some of the issues, including mortality, but there's still a 9-fold increase in mortality in ANCA patients versus non-ANCA population controls. They have lots of relapses in this disease because the therapy that's been standard, high doses of glucocorticoids plus immunosuppressives, are frankly toxic, and they cause a lot of treatment-related toxicities. That leads to some of this mortality. In fact, a lot of the mortality comes from the treatment itself, including consequences of glucocorticoids. Lots of relapses leads to lots of advancing organ damage, including in the kidney. And there's a significant amount of end-stage renal disease in this population. So for all those reasons, big unmet need, which we sought to fulfill, excuse me, with a new therapy that was specific for the mechanism of damage in this disease.
That's amazing. Wow. an amazing story also. I think I've heard a lot of great outcomes, clinical outcomes for patients from every single one of you already. But what I would love to hear everyone's, minds about, and this could really grow into a bit more of a discussion, is what kind of innovations do you think that your area, the rare disease area, is going to, face in, let's say, the next 5 years, and what kind of challenges do you think that we should all be very well aware of moving forward in the rare disease area for the next 5 years? And maybe, Adrian, I'll kick it off with you, and everyone can just pick in where they feel like they can add something to those challenges and innovations.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and I think my answer really builds on what Tom was also outlining for a disease like ANCA vasculitis. The kind of toxic broad immunosuppressive regimen that he described for that disease is actually seen in many, many rare diseases in the autoimmune spectrum. And we believe that in the long term is simply unacceptable for patients. So what we highly believe in, and what we believe VYVGART is an example of, is more precision tools that allow equivalent outcomes, but with a much better safety and tolerability profile for patients across disease. And we believe that this is the direction for many of these rare diseases in autoimmunity, where a difference will be made by not only our innovation, but also many of the innovations that you see across pipelines in the industry today.
Absolutely. Anyone who wants to add to that, Christine?
Sure. So our drug, Bylvay, is used in pediatrics and has a really incredible safety profile because it is not systemic. It's swallowed. You can sprinkle it on food. You can sprinkle it in liquid. It's swallowed. It acts in the gut, and it's excreted. And so there's very little systemic exposure, which is great for a pediatric disease, right? But there are diseases that require, additional bile acid clearance, and there are other mechanisms in the body that use bile acid transport systems. And so an area of innovation for us is a bile acid transport inhibitor that can inhibit the transport system not only in the gut, but also in the kidney, so you can clear it through urine, and also in the hepatocytes. And so one area of innovation for us will be a systemic bile acid transporter for maybe some adult diseases. The other thing is that there are transporters into the liver that are targets for hepatitis B and D. And so blocking those transporters will allow us to innovate in even larger diseases that have even a more devastating impact on public health, like hepatitis D and hepatitis B. So our emphasis and expertise in bile acids, transport, and liver in specific, I think will allow us to innovate in the short term with these compounds.
That's great innovation progress to look forward to. Shippard, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just maybe sharing an example. Given where we are, a unique position with Zolgensma as one of the first companies to successfully develop, manufacture, and commercialize a gene therapy. We have learned a lot, and we're still learning. And I think, number one, the manufacturing piece is really critical, given the rapidity in terms of what we usually get in terms of approvals. And also the opportunity to scale up with final market image of your manufacturing, and then the remarkable resources that are required to maintain consistent and quality standards for making sure patients receive timely the gene therapy. And maybe I think the second thing is around the science pertaining to understanding the pathways, the models we have, and the translatability of safety from models into human. I think that's one critical piece that we all are learning moving forward. And I think collaboration around the plethora of different modalities of therapies that are currently in existence would be really important to help other upcoming therapies who might not be at the advanced stage as others, so that they don't have to repeat or fall into the same traps as before. And I think the last comment is always around how do we recalibrate the reinvestment model, which is really still leveraged on a hallmark, of a traditional approach of a chronic therapy. And how do you make sure that, especially in SMA, where we say time is neurons, there's no time when a drug is approved in a country to spend time negotiating when patients are waiting for the treatment. So what are some of the creative, innovative solutions for access for patients so that they can receive this treatment timely? And also, how would you then make sure that this treatment is also available for patients in low-income countries in a timely fashion?
Absolutely. I think that especially that last element is going to be critical moving forward, where health equities become such an important factor in our whole healthcare industry and in the way that we're all thinking through these problems and challenges. Thank you so much for sharing that. Philippe, what would be your view on this? What would be the innovations and challenges that you see moving forward?
Yeah, so I think I see like three innovations to move forward, and I'm looking at it more from a nanobody than perspective. First, with having this nanobody being launched and demonstrating that it's doing the job, I think we were able to further secure investment in building out the nanobody platform any further, because I'm sure that these nanobodies can really make a difference in some other important and pretty challenging diseases like in oncology and immunology. So that's one thing. The second thing is that as we have been exploring and leading in the field in TTP and TMA in a broader sense, it's important that we also keep pushing ourselves and raising the bar in the treatment options for these patients with thrombomicroangiopathies. And there I see that together with some other companies, we're really moving forward, and we were also able to initiate a new study even with Cablivi, where we're gonna test Cablivi without any plasma exchange. So we want to remove plasma exchange from the standard of care for TTP and TMA in a broader sense. So that will be pretty exciting, and especially for patients that have and suffer a lot also from PECs and the consequence of PECs. And then the third thing, and that's a more general thing, where I see that we can do even better as an industry, is in diagnosing and finding these patients. We were already alluding on it. We are all working in pretty rare diseases and to some extent ultra rare diseases, so it's not easy to find the patient, diagnose him in time or her in time, and get them on treatment timely to save their life. And I see, and that's I think the win-win that we generated with our acquisition with Sanofi, that has a big specialty care unit and expertise built up over the last couple of years, is that there is a lot going on in artificial intelligence and in trying to predict where patients are going to pop up. And we have a pretty exciting project going on in the US, which is such a big market and such decentralized market to some extent, where we are really hopeful to see, with combining a couple of data sets, we can predict patients popping up like 6-7 days before they are being diagnosed by their doctor. And if this can be further worked out and extrapolated, I'm pretty hopeful for all the other rare diseases where this AI technology can be implemented. So I think there are different ways of innovation, and I'm pretty hopeful that this can be leveraged for many other diseases and many other patients.
Wow, that's amazing. Also, I love that last piece of identifying the patients ahead of actually being diagnosed. I think something like that would obviously make a huge difference. Tom, any innovation and challenges from your perspective that we should be looking forward to?
Yeah, I think that it's very gratifying to listen to this panel. And I think what I'm hearing from all of us is that we have this kind of patient-first philosophy, which is not just gratifying on a humanitarian level, but it also has some very important pragmatic values, it occurs to me. And for example, in our own experience with Tavneos, by very precisely targeting the C5a receptor, we were able to show in this orphan disease, again, that had no real innovations for many, many years, we were able to achieve a superior remission in those patients over the course of our trial, our blinded trial. We saw fewer relapses. We saw renal improvement. I mean, we saw some real tangible benefits for the patients that made differences to their lives, which I think will be very important for patients. But I think also what that experience taught me and taught us is probably there are 2 or 3 really innovative trends just in our industry. And our experience in the trial with Tavneos and ANCA-associated vasculitis probably exemplifies some of these things. And I've heard this in different ways from other members of this wonderful panel. And so, for example, I think one innovative trend we're going to see in this disease and others is much more targeted therapies. And by that, I mean either genetically targeted, of course, whether it's the actual gene itself or a consequence of a mutation with some pharmacologic agent. That's a wonderful innovation. I think we're going to see more of that over time. Or just precisely targeting a causative mechanism of disease action and tissue destruction, which is what we did in ANCA-associated vasculitis with Tavneos by eliminating the ability of this highly pro-inflammatory cascade of C5a binding C5a receptor on inflammatory cells from destroying blood vessels and other tissues over time. So this really beautiful, innovative trend that I think we're seeing comes from a patient-first focus. Let's really make a difference. And I think the other trend is obviously, let's custom make therapies for some of these rarer diseases and not just bolt on other things like immunosuppressives. And Arjun and Phil both alluded to this. Yes, we can do so much better. And when we do better scientifically, we do better therapeutically, we do better for patients, and ultimately, we do better for society. So I think those innovative trends are what I see.
I love that. I see a bunch of people nodding, so I think everyone's in agreement on, where we're moving towards. Maybe just a follow-up question from everything that I've been hearing from all of our panelists here today is, I hear a couple of elements related to collaboration with other companies, health equity, and also using data and AI to really help with that patient-first, patient-centric mindset. And I'll quickly jump back to Arjan and Christine as well. Like, I think this is something that, especially from your perspectives, is definitely also something that I could imagine being extremely valuable moving forward. Is there anything that you would have in mind, like a practical example or anything looking forward that you would see with that AI and health equity and collaboration perspective that you think would be valuable to share here?
Yes, let me jump on the collaboration aspect. Co-creation for Argenx is one of our core values. We have a partnership in every program from day one, and we think it's fundamental in innovation to match, let's say, the right expertise across the program throughout academic, other biotech, and our own capability to set the program up for the right success. So for Vyvgart, the fundamental collaboration started with Professor Sally Ward at UT, University of Texas Southwestern, and we've continued to work with her even till today on many different aspects on understanding the fundamental biology of the target and how our drug interacts with it. And this is a model that we continue to replicate actually across our pipeline and how we intend to build a portfolio going forward.
Amazing.
Yes, so thank you, Alexandra. So, what I'll comment on is collaboration and I think challenges, right? So in a pediatric space, the expectations are quite high for the clinical studies and the safety profiles, and the post-marketing commitment needs are pretty rigorous and expensive. And I think folks don't always understand that when they are considering the price of a drug, right? It's not just what it costs to develop the clinical trial program and all the infrastructure around it, but also the post-marketing commitments that you get, really saddled with after the approval. And having an approval both in the US and in Europe means that you get additional post-marketing requirements. And we're in an unusual space where we actually have, there is another company developing IBAT inhibition. And either by design or just by happenstance, the collaboration in the post-marketing commitments has been really helpful. So for example, we're the first in the market for PFIC. They're the first in the market. This other company is the first in the market for another disorder. And our post-marketing commitments, we're setting them up, but we're setting them up with the mindset of, this other company will need to utilize it as well. And so those folks that we're negotiating with, those external folks who are going to run registries and things like that, we're all aware that we're paving the way for other companies to utilize these long-term registries as well. And the same thing is happening in their indication. And so I think the collaboration really helps one of the big challenges that small companies have, which is, the cost not only of developing the drug, but keeping your commitments for post-marketing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Anyone else who has any comments or thoughts to share on where we landed here?
Yeah, I think that with Cablivi, we pretty much demonstrated what the collaboration can look like. Obviously, it was through an acquisition, but I think we combined the best of both worlds, because on the one hand side, we had the innovative technology platform that was developed by a small, nimble and humble biotech with the spirit and the flexibility that needs to go through this type of a development journey. And on the other hand, we were able then to leverage the capability skill set of a big pharma organization to get the drug where it needs to go, and where patients can benefit from it. And I think that's not always a given to make it happen, and also to have a kind of a smooth transition from the biotech spirit into a big pharma spirit. But here in this case, it worked pretty much out, while at the same time the Abling's people and technology platform has been preserved in the organization, kind of ring fence, so that they can continue to do what they're good at, and that's developing nanobodies for new unmet need targets.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm quickly taking a peek if there are any audience questions that have been submitted. I don't see any immediately. So as we still have a little bit of time, maybe I can just ask you guys a personal question that I would have, which is, if you would have the opportunity to go back in time 5 years or a little bit longer, depending on what you want yourself, is there any piece of advice, anything that you would like to tell yourself, like, be aware of this, it's going to be fine, what would you give yourself, your younger version, as advice, knowing what you know today? And again, I'll start with you again, as you're on the top of my list here.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting and very hard question, first of all. I think if I put it in the Argenx context, what we had to recognize, and I think this will sound familiar to the other biotech companies here, is when you're doing such development of your innovation, you're, let's say, driving your car and building your car at the same time, right? This is happening in parallel. You're building the organization that can carry the development, that can carry the launch in parallel to actually the development steps that you're taking. There is no way out of that. You simply have to move forward. And I think with hindsight, there's a lot of things we did incredibly well. And what we probably would do even more is forward-looking planning of capabilities. I think the earlier you have certain of these capabilities across the spectrum that you need as a fully integrated biotech company, the more it will help you in your long-term positioning of your drug.
I think that's a great answer. Christine, what advice would you give yourself? What would you want to know ahead of time?
Well, I think any of us involved in drug development, no matter how much faith and trust you have in the compound that you're testing, you never know what's going to come out of the clinical trial. So I would tell myself to trust in the drug, that it's working the way you think it's going to work. The phase 2, phase 3 studies all came out the way we hoped and expected. So calm down and don't stress so much about it. But the other thing, that's more serious is, the indications that you go for are so important, right? And it's easier to go for a narrow indication. You study the population, it's well controlled. But, these diseases don't work that way. PFIC is a genetic disease, but the genetics is often extremely ambiguous. It's autosomal recessive, but a lot of patients are heterozygotes and there's no apparent other gene involved. And so opening up the study to, at least in the second iteration, our open label extensions, to some of the populations of patients we're seeing now, these rarer patients who don't fit the classic phenotype. Because, once you have a product in the market, right, now you understand where the questions are. And, having that information in hindsight would help, as you design the clinical trial and you can serve more people. Now we've got to figure out how to get data on all these very minute populations to really be able to support the clinicians. But so that's something I think we could have done differently, is really open the study up to a less defined population.
I think that's great advice. Shepard, what about you? What would you give yourself as advice, or would you have liked to have known about a little bit earlier on?
Really fantastic question. I look at the question as something that's maybe dynamic in terms of where I'm at in clinical development, just like everyone else has been talking. I look at it as a continuum, in that what was 5 years ago and what it is today is a compilation of experiences where one will always have to recalibrate and pivot on the learnings. So I can give a learning on a platform, of gene therapy, which I would call maybe a first generation platform. Whilst you're working on that platform with the excitement and passion of wanting to address unmet need across a number of rare genetic diseases on the same platform, you learn that there are other elements in your assumptions that will have to be changed, and then you can move on maybe to a better platform, which I could call second generation. So the learnings that I've had in the last 5 years are a continuum of failures that have catapulted us into mini successes, and we continue to be inspired and in being creative across manufacturing, learning about translation in terms of models and also different diseases, and then safety. And then, as I mentioned before, finding innovative solutions so that patients can access our medicines.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. Philippe, any advice that you would have liked to, given yourself a couple of years ago?
Maybe one advice, a couple of advice, obviously, because we're learning as we go, especially if you're in a biotech environment. Now, clearly, in these first couple of years, we have been focusing hard at the time on the clinical development and making it an FDA or EMA approvable file. But with an FDA or an EMA approval, the journey only starts, because it doesn't mean anything that you get your drug actually to the patient. So what I would do maybe differently is to ensure in quite early already in the development, having health economic data already being collected, quality of life data, because these are data that payers look at. And obviously you collect a lot of clinical data and you can demonstrate a lot of value that your drug is giving. But at the end of the day, they also look at cost versus the value. And unfortunately for the patient, but it is a reality, and it will definitely not change in the next couple of years to come, with budgets being much and much more compromised. So I think that's what I would recommend other biotech leaders to do. Don't be shy, and don't design your clinical trials just for being an approvable file, but already think one step ahead and try to also tackle the access piece at the same time, because it's very difficult to get that retrospectively managed.
No, that's great. Yeah. Tom, I would also love to hear what you would give yourself as advice. And after that, we would also love to just quickly ask Christine to, elaborate a little bit on her audience response from just before. So Tom, maybe you go ahead first, and then we can go to Christine immediately.
Thank you, Alexandra. This is such a thought-provoking question, and one very difficult to answer, but, it occurs to me as I've been hearing the other really deep responses from our panelists, to me, and when I look back, I wish I were able to have told myself 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, there's actually two kinds of nature we are dealing with in our business. We are dealing with Mother Nature and human nature. And what do I mean by that? Well, first, both must be considered deeply in order to convert some of our dreams of really new innovative medicines into a reality. So Mother Nature is the science part. I mean, everyone on this panel and others in our industry, we all have great science. We've mastered Mother Nature somehow. Really innovative approaches, new targets, really difficult science though. I mean, it's a mountain to climb every time we think about bringing an innovative insight into the clinical development world, and then much less to actually get an approved medication. But, we're good at Mother Nature. We're really good at the difficult science, and great science does make great medicine. And that's what this panel shows. That's what our industry shows. But then we have human nature, right? And human behavior that's something we have to understand. And I didn't understand it when I was first starting out. It's just as important to be sensitive to human behavior and to be truly successful. And to be truly able to help patients, we have to understand that. We believe as scientists to our core that great data should speak for itself, right? That's probably part of who we are as scientists. But even the best data, I've learned, does not speak for itself. It's kind of like human rights. It should be self-evident, but it isn't. Great data must be vigorously defended. It must be patiently described and repetitively described to various audiences, both from physicians to regulators to payers, and then ultimately, of course, to the patients who actually get it the most, right? They understand the most. But there are many constituencies we have to deal with, and we just have to not be naive. Retrospectively, I would have said to myself, understand there are these two natures. You're going to try to master one because that's your talent, but the other one, don't be naive about. Don't get discouraged. We have to understand that human nature is sometimes as difficult as Mother Nature, but it's just as important in order to bring these innovative dreams into reality and help patients.
Amazing advice. Yeah, absolutely. Christine, I do quickly want to jump back to you related to our audience question. I think you've seen the question already, so I'll just repeat it. Has anyone used rare pediatric disease priority review vouchers?
Yeah, so we haven't used our voucher. We got a voucher. And so for those that aren't aware, the FDA does some really fabulous things for priority review of neglected or pediatric diseases, which are often difficult to study given the vulnerable population. So they grant a priority review for those kinds of indications, and it's a 6-month review instead of a 10-month review. And then there's usually associated, additional conversations that you get with the FDA. And so they really help you along. And then if the drug gets approved, then you get a priority review voucher that you can use for any indication or you can sell it. And so Albireo is the first IBAT inhibitor in PFIC, received a priority review voucher.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. We are at the top of our time. I would like to thank my panelists here today for the amazing discussion, for the great insights. This has been very valuable for myself and I hope for the audience as well. Just as a small reminder, this webcast is also available on the Galien Foundation's homepage. And on Thursday, we have the Jubilee Forum starting at 7:30 a.m. with later that day the presentation of the 2022 Roy Vagalas Pro Bono Humanum Awards at 6:30 p.m., followed by the Galien Awards dinner, both of which will be held at the American Museum of Natural History. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.